Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Keith with Vintage Fishing Reel Rescue. This channel is dedicated to saving fishing reels from going in the trash, getting them back in service. Fishing reels that have been sitting a long time, neglected, abused, that type of stuff. I like to pick these fishing reels up like flea markets. Estate sales are real good. Garage sales, you get the point, that type of deal. Today we have this Silstar Edge 70. Not sure if you can see that real good there with the handle in the way. Gear ratio is 4.0 to 1. It's a long cast. It does have ball bearings in this reel. It has aluminum spool. This is a metal body on this one, I believe. Actually, it's graphite. I'm sorry. Okay. Alright, this one here, it's seems to be working okay. The bail trip works a little bit noisy. As you can hear, there's a little squeak from the handle. There's a little bit of gear noise. It's not a real high-end reel, but it's a decent reel. It's a larger reel. It'd be good for light saltwater use, pretty much all freshwater fish. Another issue with this one here is the anti-reverse is not working on it. Probably gummed up with grease. It could be broken in there. I hope not. Having trouble finding parts for a lot of these reels. This one's not super old. I think this one's probably 20, 30 years old. It's probably somewhere in the 90s, my guess. Maybe even early 2000s. Pretty decent condition. It's not all banged up, beat up. Don't look like it has a lot of use. There's not really even wear on the where the seat, the foot sits on the reel, on the rod, is not really even wear from the rod seat. No real scratches or anything. It's in pretty nice condition. Picked this one up fairly cheap. It was in a box with a bunch of others. So let's get into this. Let's get this tore apart. We'll see what's going on with the anti-reverse, see what the noise is about, see if there's anything we can do about it. See if we can get this fishing reel back out on the water, catching fish where it should be. Right, drag seems to be working on it. Let's see if we tighten it down. Yeah, it definitely gets stiffer, so that's good start. Let's pull this drag knob off here. That'll allow me to get the spool off. That's looking pretty clean in there. The rotor, the spool's pretty clean underneath. The rotor's pretty clean, a little bit oily looking. Okay, let's take the handle off here. Turn this cap knob off. Oh, nope, this one that don't have to come off. This one the handle's going to spin off. Wasn't sure. You never know on some of these. The handle, the opposite way it turns when reeling in is the way the handle's going to turn to come off. There's a folding handle. Okay, we got the handle off. I'm going to pull these 4 cover screws off. That'll allow me to get the cover off and see what's going on inside with this reel. I want to try to use a proper size or correct size screwdriver. One that's in good shape, not all chewed up and everything, so you don't tear the screws up and damage anything. Use this one to break them loose, and then use a little bit smaller one to take them out. It's maybe a little bit larger screwdriver, but there we go. Okay, I'll take this one here. These you can use either a flat regular screwdriver or a Phillips on. They have both option. I seem to be picking the flat screwdriver a lot lately for some reason. It's not working real good. Let's go over to the Phillips, see if that one will work better on these screws. Yeah, that one grabs them a lot better, so let's go with that. Okay. I use parts trays to keep my parts organized so I don't lose anything. That's a part from another broken fishing reel I'd done a video on earlier. When I lay my screws out, I like to lay them out, compare them to make sure that they're all the same length, or if they're different lengths, note where the shorter or longer screw goes. I also suggest taking pictures as you go in case you get into a bind, something falls off, maybe you didn't see where it come from. The picture will help. I have the video here to rely on, and I go back from time to time. I have to go back and review the video I get distracted, you know, have to go do something else, come back to this, or looking for parts or something like that, and the reel's tearing apart for a while, I may have to go back and review the video to see how it went. My memory isn't as great as it should be, and a lot of people's isn't. Alright, all these screws appear to be the same size. Just seen the cover's ready to come off. Here we are. Definitely grease down in here, but it's not all dirty or anything. This has bushings on the main shaft, which means that ball bearing the case is talking about is going to be on the rotor, which is in a very good position. That's one of the best places to have it if you can. The reason being is that rotor is supported by that pinion shaft, which only has the one support area, which will be that bearing. The main gear is supported on both sides of it, so a bushing is fine there. Bushing's not going to make the reel any less smoother. Bearing would make it a little bit smoother, yes, a little bit freer, but you're not even going to notice a difference between the bushing and the bearing. You know, especially if you're not real experienced or different reels and everything. We want to get all this old grease out. This grease is quite dried out, not working anymore, and this grease will gum things up, as you've seen from other videos. So I try to get as much of it out as I can. Let's pull this bushing off. We'll wipe this bushing off. This does have a washer on between the bushing and the main gear. It come off with the bushing. You didn't see that. And this bushing, don't need to worry about the grease down there too much. This bushing has two little notches, one on the top, one on the bottom. They fit into the case, matching notches on the case, like so, just like that. Okay. I'm going to pull that back out, leave it out a minute, I think, until I finish cleaning this all up. Actually, I put that in incorrectly. The flat side goes up because that was against here. So that'll set nice and smooth. I can leave that in place. There's not much to lubricate there anyway. Alright, let's see if the main gear will come out. Want to pay attention here. Sometimes there is springs and stuff that need to be in a certain spot, so you want to kind of pay attention when you pull it apart and look. This one does have such spring. This spring here works with this anti-reverse lever right here. That needs to be in that groove upon reassembly. Sometimes these main gears have a hole drilled in them. It's a sight window where you can see it. This one here, there's enough clearance. As you put it in, you can look in from this direction and see everything, and see it slides right down into there. So you need to remember that when reassembling this. You want that in place, otherwise that anti-reverse arm will not work properly. And that locks you out of reverse, or when you flip the switch here, that arm seems to be gummed up. When you flip that switch, puts it into where you can go into reverse. So wipe this old grease out of there. That's pretty clean. Get it. This does have a little bit of dirt right there. Make sure that's all off of there. And you use a stainless steel brush on this part here just to get this dirt corrosion off of here. There we go. You can use steel wool, green. I use a green scrubby from the kitchen a lot of times to clean parts up. All that stuff works. In fact, I've got them both right here on the bench. I've got my steel wool right there. I've got my green scrubby. Just use this stainless steel brush this time. Want to not use that on plastic painted surfaces. Surfaces that might get damaged. You want to be careful about. Okay, get the axle shaft out next. This screw here holds the axle shaft into this T-block here. This T-block rides on a pin on this lower gear. This gear is driven by this small gear on the main shaft. When this gear turns, it moves this axle shaft up and down, in and out, forward, backward, whatever way you want to say it. And that is what allows for the spool to be wound evenly. The line get wound back on the spool because this is going in and out as your rotor's turning. I can't demonstrate it because I have the main gear out. I can demonstrate it as I put it back together though. So now I'm going to pull this screw out. That will get my axle shaft out. You can see the buildup of grease up in here. Let's get this screw out. Put that in my parts bin. Oops, dropped it. Put that in my parts tray. Now the axle shaft should pull out. It pulls out nicely. Wipe that off. We want to look to see it, make sure it's not bent, make sure the teeth aren't tore up on this clicker gear. This ain't real important. It makes noise, you know, but you want to look for any damage or anything. There is a spacer washer right here on the top that spaces the spool properly, so the clicker, this little plastic deal on the bottom of the spool, lines up with this properly and makes its little noise. That's so you can hear when you have your drag loose. When a fish takes off with it and your drag is working, you can hear that. That's what the clicker is about on that. Okay, now we can remove this nut, which will get the rotor off. Use a good socket on that. Proper tool is the best. A lot of times I'll use a pair of pliers on them. I do a lot. Nope, that nut's fairly tight, so we'll get my driver. Break that loose. It's usually normal thread, right tight, left loose. There, I'll set that in my parts tray. This rotor will come right off. We want to watch for washers here and underneath. Watch for any parts falling out. Okay, good. That's a good sign. Okay, this does not have a washer here on that. It may be on top of that bearing. We'll wipe this all out, getting dirt out of here. It's a pretty clean reel, really. I mean, there's not a lot of grime and everything in here. There's the bail release lever there. The bail is working pretty good on this one. I'm going to lubricate it. I'm not going to bother tearing apart. I am going to pull this side cover here, and I'll show you why. On this particular one, there's other ones like this, but there's moving parts in this. And I like to get a little bit of lubrication on those also and look for dirt. See, it is pretty clean in here. I'm going to put a little bit of 3-in-1 oil in here just to lubricate those pieces, help everything move freely. I lubricate the spring. I lubricate that shaft lightly. Also put a little bit of lubrication on this screw because it'll work down in between the screw and that arm. You'll be careful when you do this because that spring is under pressure. It can come shooting out. So I usually like to hold my thumb over it, keep it from shooting out, hold it in place. The cover does it when it's assembled. And I work that so all those parts get lubricated. I'll put a little bit of lubrication right there. That'll get down into there. Make sure everything's nice and free. Now put the side cover back on. If that bail was quite sticky and that little bit of lubrication I just did not help it, I would disassemble it and clean everything and lubricate it. But it doesn't feel bad, it doesn't sound bad, and it is working freely, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. Although I am noticing right here, this bail may be bent. You can see there's a wide gap here and it's tight down the bottom. That can cause this to bind up. So let's loosen this, take this bail screw here out, see what the bail does. If it stays in place, then the bail is fine. If it pops off to the side one way or the other, then the bail got bent sometime. The reel may have gotten dropped on the ground or when he threw it in the back of the truck or whatever happened to it. Like I said, this reel doesn't look real abused. It looks like it's pretty good shape, very little use. So you never know what happened to him. Let's see what happens here. Okay, there's no washer on that side. There's the screw. There is a washer in this side. Now that bail actually is not bad. It stayed fairly close. It's a little bit off. I think I am going to try to bend it just a little bit. Let's pull this roller off so we can lubricate that. Try to bend that in a little bit just to get it to line up a little better. See, now it lines up perfectly. You can see, I don't know if you can see that, but as I move that in and out, you can see what I'm talking about. And if it's pushing that hard on that, pushing pressure onto here, that'll cause a drag on that arm, which can cause that bail to release slower. So now with that bail pretty much where it goes, you can see that close that gap up in the bottom, and it's about even. Okay, this bushing here, this has a nylon bushing. I'm going to put just a drop of oil. We don't need a big amount onto that bushing. Let's lubricate that shaft also. Put a drop on the shaft. Probably really doesn't need it with a nylon bushing, but I like to lubricate them just to keep everything moving free. Now there is a washer in there. It stayed in place. I'm not going to remove it because my big fingers, it makes it hard to get some stuff back together. So I'm going to put the bail back on. Let's put the screw back in first. I like to do it that way. Get it started there. And then it'll also help hold that washer. It gives me a line-up point for the bail wire. Now, be gentle. You want to make sure not to cross thread it. You can feel if it's turning freely or not. If it's turning hard, then stop, back it out, and try again. Don't crank it right down. You should just mess stuff up. There's it. So we don't have a big gap up there no more, and bottoms is pretty even. So the bail is releasing freely. It sounds good. So let's put a little lube here. Let that get down into there. A little bit lube there just to help it along. And every little bit helps. Bail is releasing freely. Okay, let's finish disassembling the body here. Pull this T-block out. Oh, the gear come right with it. You can see that's because that oil, that grease is quite sticky. It's dried out and sticky. It's not, it doesn't really have great lubricating properties when it does this. So let's lift it out of there. This will separate. You'll see there's a pin here on that gear that groove rides in that groove, which allows this to move. Clean this piece up. It's really pretty nice condition for the age of it. Like I say, it's probably, my guess is probably 20 to 30 years old. It's probably somewhere in the 90s, maybe early 2000s. I don't really know for sure. I have a lot of trouble finding out information on a lot of these reels. So I kind of don't spend a lot of time doing that anymore, unless I'm really interested in the reel or it's one I've never seen before, or a brand I've never seen before. There's so many brands, models, and everything out there. It's just mind-blowing how many different variations of each reel there is. Okay, we got the eccentric gear cleaned up. We have the T-block cleaned up. These 3 screws here will release this bearing. You can see that this bearing is not sealed on this side. Usually the sealed side's here to keep stuff from getting into the reel. But this one they didn't put it that way, and that's the way I'll reassemble it. Let's pull this out so we can get this stuff cleaned up. See if we can get rid of some of that noise. The noise may be from the bearing, it may be from the gears. The gears look nice, but they could be a little worn, or it could be from poor lubrication from that grease being set up. And that seems to be stuck into the case. What I can do is come on the back side gently. You don't want to break this tab off or mess up the gear. See if we can pry that out. There we go. It's coming right out. Okay. This one actually is quite interesting. This has this extended piece on the pinion, that actually goes into that saddle or that support for the pinion. Most of them it just cut right off and it goes against it. So that's quite interesting because that gives that rotor a lot of support. Maybe because this is a heavier reel meant for heavier, bigger fish. That may be the reason for it. Don't see that very often. At least I have not. Maybe others have. Get this cleaned up. Use a plastic brush to get the grease out of this gear. Out of the pinion gear. We'll pull that grease out of there. And we put some fresh, new, clean grease in. It's going to work a lot better. Sure, it wasn't really working bad. The main thing was the anti-reverse wasn't working and the a little bit noisy. So hopefully all this helps that. Or at least reduce it if it doesn't clear it up. Okay. Wipe most of this old grease out of this bearing and then we'll get it re-lubricated. And that side does that side have a seal? Nope, it's just a greased bearing. Yeah, I guess there is a little plastic. It's not much of a seal, but a plastic bushing washer, whatever you want to call it. Get as much of this whole grease. Let's use a little bit of penetrating oil. That'll help lubricate the bearing and soften this grease to get it out. Get me a Q-tip. Q-tips work really good for getting down into tight areas. Not going to be able to get a lot of that grease out, but it is, the penetrating oil will soften it. Get as much out as I can though. And it's actually coming out better than I thought. There we go. That bearing is slightly noisy. Whoops, knocked that screw out. That's why I should be parting my parts in my parts tray. Alright, while I'm cleaning parts, I'm going to let this sit with a little bit of oil on it. Get that oil work down in there, get it lubricated good. Now we got the side cover here. This is the anti-reverse lever here. Seems to be moving free. There is a little bit of grease and stuff on it. That may be what was gumming it up. Let's take and get this case cleaned out. I'm going to use Q-tips. It's easier to get them down in here and get this old grease out. Like I've said in a lot of my other videos, unless you're new to the channel, get as much of this old grease out as you can, because it will get drier. It will gum up parts more. It can get into the gears and really cause this thing to have issues. Like the anti-reverse issue, or not working, the anti-reverse lockout. So I try to get as much of that out, especially dirt, sand, anything like that. You want to get all that out. You can use parts washer if you have a parts washer bin. I do not. You can use penetrating oil, works good for cleaning. Even the 3-in-1 oil works good for cleaning. Oil is a good cleaner to remove grease. Okay. Now that lower bushing also has them same notches that the upper one has, so we want to make sure they're in place when we go to reassemble this. Okay. Now I'm going to put a little lubricant right there on that anti-reverse lever, just to get it free and working. Make sure it's all free and lubricated good. Put a little bit of lubricant here on the back side of that anti-reverse switch, just to keep it moving freely. A little bit of oil down into there and let that'll work, keep it moving good. Okay. And up here where it rides on the cover, I'm going to put just a drop or two into there. It's probably not going to do a lot, but it may help a little. You never know. Wasn't working before, so it sure as heck can't hurt. Okay, get that cleaned out. Side cover I've already cleaned up. I've got most of the grease the best I can out of here. Okay, let's start lubricating and reassembling. I'm going to start putting the pinion shaft back in. This pinion shaft has a washer here that goes behind the bearing to space the bearing properly. That bearing and those 3 screws is what holds the pinion shaft in. So let's stick the washer on, we'll stick the pinion bearing in, and then as it goes in, we need to line that washer up into the case. It should go right into place, which it pretty much will. There it goes, and now it's all down in there. We'll push the bearing down in. I'm going to put a little bit of lubrication onto there. Actually, I'm going to pop this back out, put just a tiny little coating of grease on the end of this shaft. I didn't think to do that. I also want to fill the teeth in this gear with grease. There we go. Get some of that excess off. We don't need quite that much. Now let's reassemble it. Get that washer back into place. It's going to go back down into there. I want to make sure that shaft goes into that support. That bearing is a little noisy. You can hear it. That's where the noise is coming from. I don't know if I can maybe put a little grease down into there. May help it. It did have grease in it, so it's not going to hurt anything. See if I can get some grease to work down in there and lubricate a little better. Work with that oil and put a little more oil. That'll work with that grease well. You can hear the anti-reverse dogs actually already working better because it's just gravity alone. Okay, that is a lot quieter. Not perfect, no. There's actually some space there. It could use another washer unless that bearing's not. It could use another spacer washer on there. Or I could take that spacer washer out. Okay, let's go ahead. Put the screws back into it. Get them all started and then I'll snug them up. Again, you want to try to remember to use a good screwdriver. Try to be careful not to cross thread your screws. This shaft will actually be tightened up once I put the rotor on and tighten this nut down so that shaft won't be free floating. You don't need to over tighten these. Snug is good. Just so they don't back themselves out, but you don't want to over tighten them and strip out your hole that the screw goes into. Okay. I think at this point I'm going to go ahead and throw the rotor on. The rotor I cleaned all up. I already lubricated everything, so I'm going to go ahead and put it on. The rotor does have a shape here, 2 flat sides and 2 round sides that matches this shaft. So you need to line them up and it'll slide right into place. And I like to turn it as I put it on. So sometimes they have the clicker under here that needs to be in, worked into position, or other parts that may need, you can't just force it down onto it. This one doesn't, so we're good. Okay, we'll put our nut back on. We'll snug it back on up the wrench. Don't need to be super tight again. This one does not have any kind of locking mechanism, so a little bit tighter is going to be good. There we go. Yep, there's the noise still, so that bearing could be replaced. I don't have one to fit it, so we're not going to be too carried away. Alright, next I'm going to lubricate this gear, put this into place. I like to lubricate the back side of it where it rides against the case. I'm going to lubricate the shaft it rides on and the areas that it hits on the case. I'm going to lubricate the gear, the teeth in the gear. Get them filled up with the grease. That'll keep it from running dry. Also want to lubricate the face and that pin because that T-bar here rides on that. So I'm going to put a little lubrication here and then in the groove. Those are all moving parts. You always want to make sure to lube any moving parts. And also pay attention to this piece when you pull it out. I didn't mention it earlier, but you can put this in backwards and the reel won't go together properly. It won't work right. But make a note, the way where the screw is, sometimes this is a longer and the screw's toward the back or toward the front. This one here has this piece that rides on this part of the case, which I need to lubricate also. So you just want to note that. So when you go to reassemble it, you're not like confused when it don't work properly if you put that in backwards. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put the axle shaft in. Put a light layer of grease on that, just super light, because it's just going to, most of it will push off if you put a big amount on it. Just that's good enough. And that'll lubricate it in that pinion shaft. So I'd like to turn it as I put it in. That moves that lubrication around. Hold the T-block in place. Your axle will slide right directly into it. And then you want to line up the screw hole. You stick the screw down in here. A little bit greasy, so my fingers are sticking. I want to be careful not to cross thread it. I know I say it 100 times, but I watch people cross thread stuff all the time and then wonder why it don't work right. Snug it up, but not overly tight. There, the axle all together. Now we can lubricate and install our main gear. Want to fill these teeth up with grease. Like that, like so. I'm going to hit a little bit of grease on that shaft. A little bit of grease on this gear because it matches with that other gear. Also, where this spring rides in those grooves, I want to put some grease there because that is a wear point. That spring stays stationary while this is turning, so that can wear on that spring and end up breaking that spring. So I like to make sure I lubricate it. Now we want to remember in the beginning I told you about this spring where it had to fit into that groove. We want to make sure we can get it there. So we're gonna, you probably can't see exactly what I'm doing, but want to watch, make sure it goes in. And then you can kind of see it down in here, see the end of it. And when you turn this, it moves. So we know it's in place. That's what that spring does, is that if you have it into the anti-reverse, the reverse is locked in, that spring is what makes that arm go up into that gear on the back of the rotor that locks it out of reverse. And then when you push the lever the other way, it holds that arm away from that gear, that piece in there, that dog from locking in. So there's that. Now we want to lubricate this shaft. This shaft had this washer on it. Slide that washer on. A little bit of lubrication on that shaft. Don't need a lot. This does have a plastic bushing in the case, or nylon bushing, which those you can get. You can find them and replace them easily enough. Okay, there it is. The side cover's on. We'll put our screws back in. I'm going to have to clean my hands up. I'm getting grease all over this outside of this reel, as you can see. Well, maybe you can't. I'm not sure how clear the video is. I like to make sure these are all started before I tighten them right down. You won't have to over tighten them. Like I said, this is a graphite case, so you don't want to strip out the holes or break the cover. Just enough pressure to keep it from backing itself out and hold the cover in place. Okay. Sometimes on these reels, if you have an aluminum cased reel and metal screws, sometimes it's a good idea to put a little bit of lube on those screws that go into the metal case, because steel and aluminum can get corroded and like basically grow together and you won't get the screws out. This one's a graphite case, so it's not that big a deal. Okay, let's wipe some of this grease off anyway. Use some clean paper towel here for my hands and wipe my hands up, and then whatever grease I'm getting off won't get back right back on there. That grease helps make these things shine too, makes them look good. It helps protect it too from the elements. Keep them looking nice a little longer. And I can already feel that anti-reverse is working now. So we did do some good here. Okay. Now we'll put the handle on. This was a left-hand retrieve. I left that cap screw on, so I'm not getting bother. I'm going to set it back up for left hand. This is a reverse thread, so it's going to go the opposite way you would. I mean, it's going to go the way you would go when you are retrieving or pulling it in. See, just like that. Still has the noise, but it's very smooth. You can see it. Anti-reverse is working properly now. Or reverse, depending on what you want. There's still that little squeak from the handle. We'll put a little lube down there to get rid of that. These handles will get gummed up sometimes too. When they get that little squeak, doesn't hurt to put just a little bit at the bottom there. Alright, that got rid of that squeak. It didn't tighten the handle down, so there we go. Bail trip's working as it should. Nice. Alright, let's clean up the drag and we'll get this spool back on. Clean dirt out of the spool. A lot of times I like to take these spools and polish them all up and everything, make them look really good. I'm not going to do that today. You guys have seen me do it a few times. I don't think you want to sit here and watch the video of me polishing a spool. So this spring holds the drag washers in. When you take it out, it is under pressure. You want to be careful it doesn't snap out and go shooting across the room or hit you in the eye, something like that. Pop it out, put it in the parts tray. Pay attention to your drag washer stack, where they come out in. You can see that this is what's called a keyed washer. It has flat spots on either side that fit that axle shaft. So I grab my screwdriver, pop that guy out. Lay it down here. It's actually really clean. I don't think this reel's got a lot of use at all. Then we'll pop the fiber washer out. There's a eared metal washer on the back side of it. We'll lay the fiber washer down. You can see the ears. There's matching slots on the spool. I got the metal, fiber, and we have our other keyed washer here in the bottom. And then lastly, a fiber washer. So we'll set that on our stack. We can clean this out. Those have a little bit of lubrication on them, so they're pretty good shape. Clean that out. I like to lubricate these fiber ones a little bit, even though these have it. Don't hurt to give it just a touch more. And this is really clean in here. I'm not going to worry too much about it. Another fiber. The eared washer, which usually is in the center. Another fiber washer, and my top that holds it all together. We'll get our snap ring. I like to start the opening away from those slots there so that it don't fall into them. And then you can just push it, work it down into there, work it around and work it down into there. Some of them can be a little bit of a hassle. And you want to look and make sure it's like this side here, I don't know if you can see it, is not in the groove. It fell below it. So we want to hold my finger over it so don't pop it out too far, but bring it back up into that groove and lock it in. There, you heard the snap. You can see it's in place everywhere else. So that's drag washers. They're not going to fall back up under the drag pack. This shaft, I like to put just a little bit of lube on it. Not because it's a wear point, but because of rust, corrosion, that kind of stuff. So put just a little lube and hit the inside of that there. Now these, the keyed washers, will need to line up with that shaft. So we'll start it in the shaft into the hole and then turn it a little bit and work it until them line up. There's two of those washers, so you'll feel it when it goes through on both of them. Sometimes it folds right on, sometimes it don't. So you hit the bottom one perfect. Now we're at the top one. And there's the top one. It's that simple. And this is something I was talking about in another video. This little guy here, when you're putting it down, can land against that gear, and if you turn it slightly, then it'll go on into the teeth of the gear like that instead of being on the gear. So that's why another reason to rotate it slightly as you're putting it together. See, now you can hear it's in place. Even if it was sitting on top of that gear, as soon as you move it, it's going to fall down where it needs to be. Okay, let's put the drag nut back on. Alright, let's test out our drag. We'll tighten it down. That's got a really tight drag. You can lock that drag right up, loosen it up. Drag's working as it should. My line's coming unspooled a little bit. You have to fix that before I get a mess going here. That little clip, that's what that is for, is to hold the line when you don't have tackle on it or it's not on a rod. You just hook the line underneath of it and it holds it in place. Okay, this reel's back together, is working properly. It's still a little bit noisy, but it's very smooth working. And our reverse is working as it should. So yeah, that's nice working reel. Alright, this one's pretty much ready to go back out on the water. It does have some older line on it. The line doesn't look like it's all faded. This reel doesn't have a lot of use. It's probably a good idea to replace it. A lot of people will. I'm not going to replace it right now. I don't know when I'm going to use this reel or if I'm just going to sell this reel. I do sell a lot of these online. I can send you the link if you want, or maybe I'll put it in the description below one of these videos so you can find these reels if there's a particular one you'd like to purchase on eBay usually, or sometimes they're on Facebook Marketplace, that type of stuff. If you're interested, contact me. I can send you the link to where to purchase the reel. This reel is ready to get back out on the water. I probably will take it out fishing before I put it up for sale if I sell it. That way I can test it, make sure it's working as it should. This does seem to be quite a long stroke reel. You can tell by how far apart that is. So yeah, and it's quite a long or deep spool. It'll hold a lot of line. Let's see here. 20 pounds line, 230 yards. So that'll hold quite a lot of line. If you get up to 45 pounds is 100 yards. So this will hold quite a lot of line. So it'd be really good for deeper water fishing. Freshwater, of course. Lighter use on the salt water. If you use this in salt water, you definitely want to rinse them off. It does have aluminum parts. The graphite's not bothered by salt water, but the aluminum will get corroded. You don't, want to get any salt drying out down in any of these moving parts or anything. So, all right, this reel's pretty much ready to go. I'm going to end this video here. I appreciate you guys watching, hanging out with me. I do this as a hobby. It's not a business, other than I do sell a lot of these reels. I got way more reels than I need, and I like doing this, so I have to do something with them. And why not sell these to be able to buy more reels, to be able to do more videos for you guys to watch. Keeps me going, gives me, I like doing this. Appreciate you guys watching. Please hit the like and subscribe button. Hit that notification button too. That way you know when I put out a new video. That way you can watch it if you're into this type of thing. Appreciate it. Thank you.